Unconventional Therapist's Guide to Nothing.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Unconventional Therapist's Guide to Nothing. My name is Dave, and I am joined with my co-host, Greg, my co-hostess with the mostest.
So, Dave, normally I'm not
Just glossed over the Beetlejuice reference.
No, great. I'm glad a new Beetlejuice came out. I'm actually very excited. It's really touching because I have a good a lot of kind of core memories about Beetlejuice as a kid.
Yeah.
Like that scene, the Harry Belafonte.
We've all seen it, Greg.
Okay, see, you never know what to do with you. But I'll tell you one thing though. I don't like to do the small talk before the show. But
Why?
I have to. I don't know. It's just I kind of always like to dive right in. But
Why?
Don't therapize me.
I'm just curious. Why don't you like to do small talk? I noticed this. Obviously, I call you out on it every time. Why don't you like doing it?
I think it's just because I think people want to hear, like they see, oh, Sideshow freak, let's get into it, right? Whatever we're going to call this thing.
And they all talk like a sassy teenager?
Yeah, because that's what I'm used to. So, but I do have to mention something. So
we small talk when
only when I need something to say. Yeah, right.
Wow.
Exactly.
Okay.
You might be happy to hear this though, because I'm going through the social media and then I see something advertised on a local magazine. And by saying local magazine, I think it's sort of like undercutting it a little bit, because here in Rhode Island Monthly is a magazine that I cherish. I actually love it. There's always best clam cakes or like whatever, right?
Yeah,
like
yeah.
Something
best
that's kind
dive bar. Yeah.
Best haunted places. Sometimes they have some really cool stuff. But I'm going through and I see it and there's Dave's head on there, or local his other sort of work, his other podcast, his other I don't know, what would you call that?
Endeavor? I don't know.
Endeavor. Yeah.
Business.
So he's displayed front and center on the cover of it, and I was like, you know what? Honestly, like it made me feel a little bit, I don't bring it, I made me proud of myself, because like sometimes when you're like, I saw that and I was like genuinely happy for you and like Brandon, and I was like, wow, that's like really, really cool for them. Like you guys really plug away on that thing and it's awesome. I have friends that talk about going to those like the events that you have, the movies, and it's you guys are always kind of keeping something kind of spooky all year round. It's like super fun, and it keeps people who are really into that Halloween, that this time of year, which I think kind of starts in September, gives them something to wet their palate year round, and I think that's really cool. And I was happy to see it, and inside right. I was like, it's nice that hard work sort of pays off sometimes.
That's probably been like the best feeling about it was like, because I've been doing that since 2018, and a lot of like feelings of being underappreciated or like not recognized have happened, and getting some a publication like that to kind of recognize was pretty awesome. But also, it's kind of like what we do. It's people getting together with like a similar interest. And I mean, it's very similar to like us with just enjoying talking about psychology and mental health, and sometimes weird and
murderers and brains and stuff like that.
Yeah. I mean, so it's like, it's just another version of that that I've been doing. And like you mentioned, just so people have an idea what you're talking about, that the PVD horror group that I co-run, been doing movie screenings, podcast, all these different events for years. And yeah, they wrote up a little blurb, but it was pretty cool.
So if you're into horror, check out PVD horror, because I think it's cool. I'm not a super horror guy, but I think that like I've been to a couple events, and the people involved in that are always super nice. I think there's something very interesting about people who have the courage to look at the darker things in life, because that's what makes a good person, right? If you have the courage to turn around and look at your own darkness, then it makes you certainly more well-rounded. And I think ironically, when you meet people who are like into metal or horror, they're ironically very kind people. So yeah, check it out. But kind of sticking with that theme, sort of, right?
Sure.
Let me
Sure.
talk about a couple things here. So shows that I appreciate. My weird obsession. I don't know if you've seen any of these. Maybe someone's eating cotton balls.
No, no,
Maybe.
no. Isn't it My Strange Addiction?
Yep,
Oh, all right.
sure
Is
is.
that what you're referring
So
to? Yeah.
this guy passed the quiz right off the bat. That's great. What about My 1,000 Pound Sister? I doubt that's the name too. You know what I mean,
My
though.
600 Pound Life. And then
Yep.
there is one about two sisters. I can't remember what
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
called.
yeah. You
Yeah, I
don't know
know
what
these
it's
shows.
like,
I know these
Amy.
shows.
Oh, yeah, those are
Yeah.
great shows,
Taboo
right?
Taboo was another one. I don't know if you remember Taboo.
I do remember Taboo. I remember Ripley's Believe It or Not. I remember, but like even changing out of that vein, think about shows like Jersey Shore. Think about Jerry Springer, right? We have a culture that's obsessed with observing obscurity, and that's a triple alliteration
Did I
purposely
ever tell
done.
you about the time I was on Jerry Springer? It didn't get aired, but
You were not the
I
father?
I got called up on stage and I did a dance off with someone on the stage and I did like a weird version of like thrusting and the worm to I touch myself in front of an audience.
Wow.
I kind of went like just blank in
Dissociated.
order to get like the courage to do it, but I had to do it because like I was on stage and I just put in my all and it was pretty wild. I have a video
What
of it
is
to
that
show you
on YouTube?
sometime. No, I'll bring it. I'll show you
Yeah, let's
sometime.
see a clip. I mean, we're on
Yeah,
YouTube. Right? Let's see a clip. I would
I
love
can
that,
post
right?
it. Yeah, yeah.
So, hey, look, we're talking about human beings on display, right? That's what we're talking about right here. When you're on there, you're doing the worm, you're thrusting around. Like there's this voyeuristic nature in all of us. I mean, we can go back to the Colosseum. Deformed, handicapped people were gracing the halls of Buckingham Palace, wherever palaces in Europe, all over, right? Um, they would have dwarfs and little people. Can't say dwarfs anymore. Little people,
Little people.
all kinds of anomalies, right? But like, what interests us about this, Dave? Like, what is this? I think that's going to be part of this episode is trying to understand, especially through the lens of the Victorian era, which is, I think, the most interesting portrayal of what we're talking about here, sideshows. And another question I want to ask us, and maybe we can get to the bottom of, is was this exploitation? And
Mhm.
is it exploitation if it's chosen, right? Like when we talked about Elephant Man, he was sort of chose to be in the sideshows because it was better than being in the workhouses. So it's like sometimes we do this weird thing where like we think we know better for people who are in sort of like a marginalized. And so we do this thing where it's like, no, like we can't do that to them, where it's like, well, that's actually helping them. But I wanted to ask you this question because it's making me think about it now. Like, and I think that's at some point, because I've been seeing this a lot with young men, or actually all men, not always, but a lot, is exploitation. Let me ask you this: like, well, like porn, is that exploitation? If it's chosen, or can it be chosen?
What do you mean?
Like,
Can it be chosen?
so I know that we've talked before, like we're like I've known people, or have even had patients in the industry, and there's it's never, well, I can't say never, but in my experience, it hasn't been that there's been like a great background, a great upbringing, a super healthy family life, and then chosen to go um, work in the sex industry. And maybe
Yeah, but
that's
I
not
think
the
that's
case.
changing. So I think that
Sure.
there's a lot of changes that are happening in society that are making like bringing light to that industry and kind of making it an industry that's I don't know
As you say
has
that, right? I'm kind of thinking like I'm a boomer because I wasn't really considering OnlyFans, but even still, I don't know. Like
yeah yeah
maybe there's going to be
that's
like a
kind of what
mental
I
block,
mean.
you know.
And even getting in more mainstream, it's become more mainstream, and that's kind of probably its own show, to be honest with you.
Absolutely.
But I think like when you think of probably what you're envisioning is some of like the earlier versions of it that we would know, but even like for us even to comment, we're probably both too uninformed to really give a good judgment, because we both have like probably like a stereotypical version of it in our heads of how, like, in that might even be just like Hollywood's version that we've seen in movies where people stray onto the wrong path or something like that.
Yeah, and it's even like if you talk to like even your parents or your grandparents, especially if they were still alive. I just talked about one of those Ouija boards in your room. But like if like, you know, sometimes people have been living a way, like maybe I've been living in a certain way or have an idea of culture and what's appropriate and what's healthy, that I might have a hard time understanding that you could be sort of mentally healthy and still want to have an OnlyFans and sell, you know.
I mean, I do think there's something to the psychology of wanting to, and this kind of, just to kind of bring it back to what the topic is, there is something in our psychology that like actually makes us want to show off certain aspects of us that might be vulnerable, whether it's your naked body or some sort of physical deformity or something that makes you different than the general population, right? So I do think that there's something about a person's psychology that makes them, you know, brave enough or embrace that vulnerability to do that. And I think that's going to be pretty topical in this episode, is why.
This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. We're all spread pretty thin, and it can be easy to ignore our own needs. We can get caught up in life, concerning ourselves with social life, stress, work. It can be easy to start to neglect ourselves, feeling lost, drained, or overwhelmed.
You're absolutely right, Greg. Therapy can help by providing us the tools you need to improve your mood and understand you can't help others without helping yourself. One of the things that has prevented people from the help they need is accessibility, whether it's transportation, time, getting an appointment in a timely manner, or even issues that prevent you from leaving the house.
And therapy, being even more accessible, is where BetterHelp comes in.
BetterHelp is entirely online, convenient, and flexible.
But Dave, here's something I'm worried about. What if we get matched with a therapist and it just really isn't a good fit?
Well, Greg, that's one of the best features of BetterHelp. If for whatever reason the therapist isn't a fit, you can switch therapists completely free.
And that's going to save you any awkwardness, hard feelings, and just avoiding that tough conversation. Find your social sweet spot with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/nothing today to get 10% off your first month.
That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/nothing, NOTHING, for 10% off your first month.
Dave and I believe very deeply in therapy.
So much so, we've devoted our entire lives to it.
So go to betterhelp.com/nothing.
And get that BetterHelp you need today.
Well, so like, for example, I think I'll give you a quick example that I'm thinking of in my head, and then we will get back on track. But like, say someone, like a young woman's abused, right? And she was sort of sexually abused. And so that was out of her power. And so she's like, I'm going to take my power back and own my sexuality and actually make money on my sexuality,
sure.
Right? So that seems like empowering, but you wouldn't had been on the path to selling your body on the internet had you not been abused. Now, is that an appropriate adaptation?
Yeah, but that's one version of it, because there could be another version where someone's like, no, I'm not going to I'm not going to engage in things like that because that's me taking the power of what I choose to do with my body. I think that's the whole point, is they can choose whichever path they want. So yes, they could choose to be in the sex worker industry, or they could choose to be, you know, abstinent, whatever. They have the choice, is what I think the point is. I mean, and like that example though is like, it's cookie cutter, right? That's kind of what we think of when we think of like someone who gets in the industry and what might make them. That would be so, that would actually be really interesting to hear different versions.
Me too.
Like, what made you get into that industry?
Right. No, I would.
So that would actually be something interesting.
So maybe that's an episode for down the road.
Maybe
guys.
that's our next podcast. Greg and Dave get into porn.
We're gonna have to work on that name. We're gonna have to workshop that, because I think that might send the wrong message. So Dave,
conventional pornographer.
Yeah. It's unconventional. So let me tell you something. Maybe it's time you talk a little bit about the history of the Sideshow.
And
Well,
like I
okay to say
don't.
freak show. What do you think there?
I mean, I would say sideshow. I think sideshow sounds classier, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, but if we're talking about like the 1800s,
Everyone knows what we're talking about,
Yeah.
right? Like, I mean, and I think that yeah. So freak show obviously has a very negative connotation, right? Um, but we know they're kind of interchangeable terms. And I don't think sideshow has a great connotation either. I'm part of a sideshow. I don't
Yeah.
think that sounds much better either. So I don't think it matters which one we really say, but I do want people to understand we're kind of using terminology of how they referred to it at the times, not how we are referring to it as of today. And I don't really have like an in-depth history, but a few points I wanted to make about the history of it. So like during the 1800s, circuses at some point began to offer these sideshows, which were in addition to their typical acts, and they often included people or animals with physical differences and maybe like historical oddities or wax statues, just strange and like odd things that people might find appealing to look at or make them curious or uneasy, things like that. These were advertised as dime museums, where visitors would pay to see a variety of displays, sometimes referred to as human curiosities, auditoriums, human wonders, or freak shows. It almost reminds me of like, like in the movies where like the guy goes into like the porn shop and we're back to the porn again.
Oh my God, I know.
What is going
That's a
on
Freudian
here?
slip.
Yeah, they go into the porn shop and they, put the quarter in and the screen lifts and they see like the woman dancing on the other side. That's kind of what
Yeah.
this reminds me of almost, like, except you're seeing, and like, I actually think, didn't they have stuff like that at like, even in more recent, like, carnivals and things like that, where they would have
Maybe.
something
I
you put
mean,
money in and you would see, no, maybe
I'll
not.
tell you what.
Maybe I'm dreaming.
Maybe you're dreaming it, and but this is bringing me like Freud wrote about this a little bit, and another thing that they would do was like the predecessors of Freud would have people with like mental illness come sit on stage, and they would like put them on display for people to come look at. It's almost like a human zoo, which is like a really, and that's what we're kind of talking about here.
Oh yeah, 100%. It is like a human zoo. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if I've ever heard anybody describe it like that. You get that here at Unconventional Therapist, right?
I heard it one time described as that somewhere else.
Okay.
No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. So the highlight of this, the sideshow was the quote unquote freak, or a person that was considered to be physically different. And the performers of these freak shows were often marginalized by society, and they had very few choices of how to make a living outside of the circus. So what would happen at times is like whoever was like the circus manager, I don't know what you would call that person, like the ringmaster, I don't know maybe something like that. They would sometimes offer the family money, like, I'll pay you such and such a week, and in turn I'll take your child and bring them around with me. And a lot of times the families were poor. And
yeah, imagine that therapy session, like the first session. Well, it all started when my family sold me to the circus.
Right.
Hello.
So they would gladly give up their child because this child probably couldn't help provide for the family, or was considered to be like quote unquote a burden, or something along those lines. So yeah, a lot of times the families sounded like they were kind of like thrilled maybe to unload this child and actually get paid for it.
Right.
And the first,
which in a weird, kind of sick way, it is creating an opportunity for the child too.
And I don't know, like I would love to know what the family's understanding of this is.
Right.
Did they know that the child's going to be maybe they know that, but like what do they know about the conditions? And I don't think that early conditions were necessarily the worst. Later conditions, I think, got bad. But I think in the beginning, I don't think that conditions were considered to be as bad as we might have in our heads. One of the first documented traveling sideshows in American history was in 1738, and it included a woman who was taken from West Africa, and she was exhibited. There was a Virginia advertisement described her as 4 feet tall and having the body of a woman but the face of an ape. So obviously super racist. Yeah. But yeah, that's one of the earliest ones. That's like 1738. That shows you kind of like how long we've been we've been so curious. But I mean, we already know that. Obviously, the humans are
Yeah,
very,
beginning of time.
very curious. Yes. Yeah. So that's kind of like a brief overview. Obviously, not too in depth, but Greg, why don't you tell us about our boy PT?
Yeah, so this is when you think of sideshows and you think of, sort of, I don't know, like maybe the biggest contributor to this, who kind of like brought it into the forefront of our consciousness is P.T. Barnum. We all know this guy, right? So he was born in 1810, considered the greatest showman, which is kind of, have you seen that movie?
No, I did not watch.
I have not either. And people tell me it's great, but I'm not really one for a musical.
Hmm.
So I bet you have been to the Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus, though, right?
Yes,
So this,
but I barely remember it.
well, I mean, I don't know if they're still touring, but they were canceled for a little while because of the animals and
I did go to a circus like within the last 15 years, and I think it was P.T. Barnum, but I can't say for sure.
It probably was Ringling Brothers and Barnum. Really, that's been around for a really long time, and it was wildly successful until kind of it wasn't. But anyways, this guy, he was a mayor, he was an entrepreneur, philanthropist. But again, like more than anything, he is a showman. So do you know that sort of quote that is attributed to him, a sucker is born every minute?
Oh, I didn't know that was him.
Well, it actually wasn't. There's no evidence that it was him, but people would feel like, hey, that's something P.T. Barnum would say, right? So in his early 20s, this is the kind of like, let me just kind of clue you in on the type of person he was. He starts a newspaper in his early 20s. He's starting slow, but he ends up creating, quote, Barnum's Grand and Scientific Museum. So his real showman career starts when he's about 25 years old. He purchases this exhibition, which was a person, just like you're kind of talking about. It's almost reminiscent to what you were talking about in 1738. It's this paralyzed, completely blind slave woman, right? And what he does is the most important thing that happens here is he starts to realize that there's a genius element to this. Like he doesn't just say, hey, look, like before in 1738, here's this woman that looks like this. No, that doesn't do much good for anybody. What he does is he creates a story. This woman's name was Joyce Heath, right? And she was, in her 80s. But he would explain that she was the 161-year-old former nurse of George Washington.
Hmm.
Now, by doing that, you create a really cool story. Now, when I don't know if I've ever shared with you this story about how important a story is to an object, but there is this show I was watching, and this guy's explaining how he has these plastic cufflinks, and everyone's making fun of them. And they're like, "Oh yeah, those are you. Your son bought those for you? Like big deal. They're like plastic cufflinks." And he's like, "No, like when I when he was a little kid, I took him to a baseball game, and these cufflinks are made of the plastic on the seats that we sat in. And now that you know that, it makes this object so much more valuable and important and cool, right? So that's what P.T. Barnum, that's his genius. So he finds things like the Fiji mermaid and Tom Thumb and albinos and little people and exotic women and bearded women and all these kinds of animals. But it's the advertising that's what makes him the greatest showman. These stories about what these things could have been, the possibility, the awe, right? When you see a Fiji mermaid, you're like, holy geez, that does something different for everybody. I don't know if we've ever talked about this, but I remember one time I came home I turned on, this is back in the days where everyone on cable, I turn on the Discovery Channel. It's like halfway through, and some people are going to relate to this. It's like halfway through a documentary about mermaids. And it's like showing all these like scenes, and I'm like having this moment, like, are mermaids real? Like, is this a real thing? And then I literally didn't find out the next day until in work that it was like a mockumentary, not a documentary.
Oh, yeah.
But it was so well done and so like serious all the way through that I was like fooled into believing that there was such a thing as mermaids. And I loved it. I was like all wrapped up in it. So I kind of like fell for this like showman trick where it's almost like showing you something that you really want to believe, but it's almost like an urban legend where it's like it could be true, but probably not. But it's kind of fun to think that it is.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. So
go ahead.
Why does he get such a bad rap?
Well, I mean, because of as time goes on, we like in the future we like to pass judgment on historical figures for a variety of different reasons. But if you talk to people, if you could talk to people who, like Tom Thumb, for example,
Yeah, he was good friends with Tom Thumb.
he was great. People were like, "Oh, you exploited this little guy," and Tom Thumb would have never said that. And there's a Ang and Yang, like these Siamese twins, and there's a bearded lady. There's so many people who would speak out and say, actually, my life would have been like Tom Thumb owned the property. He met the president.
He was
of the United
rich.
States.
Yeah, he met Abraham Lincoln.
Yeah, like he wouldn't have had that had it not been.
Do you know where Tom Thumb's from?
Narnia.
Charles Stratton is his real name. No, he's from Connecticut.
Oh, I didn't know that.
His tombstone is in Bridgewater, Connecticut, and I'm definitely making a field trip there one day because it is one of those like tall monument tombstones, and at the top is a little person.
Oh, that's
and I'm thinking it must be him.
Yeah, I get him mixed up with Tiny Tim. But Tiny Tim's a fictional
hero. Yes.
Yeah. So, well, here's. I mean, I don't know. So, I guess that's a good time to ask that question. So, is it exploiting Tom Thumb? Yeah. Does that mean it's a bad thing? No.
So, I got a good example of this.
Okay, good.
Vern Troyer.
Okay.
Also known as Mini-Me from Austin Powers.
Right.
I mean, he made a very successful career out of exploiting himself, right?
Mm-hmm.
Taking roles that obviously point, fun at his size. I mean, his whole role as Mini-Me is literally, it's funny watching a small version of a typical size person, right?
Yeah.
And that's exploitation to the fullest. What's the other one? Wee Man from Jackass?
Wee Man from Jackass, yep.
Like that's another version of this. And he would do these I don't even like saying this now. It's like, it's so funny. Something that we would say probably like 10 years ago now feels a little weird to say, but like midget wrestling and
they would like throw them at
they would
and stuff.
Oh, they did it. There was a whole thing where you could like rent little people and you for parties and stuff, and you could they wear like a Velcro suit. You could throw them on the Velcro, like totally exploitative of like them.
That's hard to wrestle against that one.
It's really hard to find an argue point in that one.
Well, I mean, work could be tough to find work.
Yes.
And maybe what if it's a little person owned business and they're like, well, there's a market for this.
Here's the flip side of this though.
Okay.
And it can go like this for, a lot of different populations, but because we're talking about little people, I actually have a good example of like the opposite end of it. So how would you feel if they say there's a movie and it's a leprechaun, for example?
Yeah.
Could you like a leprechaun horror movie? You could never envision that, I'm sure. But no, what if they didn't cast a little person for that role?
Right.
Is that actually is there something wrong with that? Is that them, because like there's some people that feel like, no, we should be cast for it because that is, do you get what I'm saying? It's kind of like the opposite argument. Like we should be in that role because of our size, and it makes sense. Because I actually interviewed for that other podcast someone who was like upset that a certain role wasn't given to a little person because it made more sense for it to be that. It's a very strange dynamic that like we would almost get upset in like the flip.
Well, the thing is, like you have to do this weird thing where even with like protests and like you have to do this weird thing where like you in a sense by arguing for that person to have more rights, which I think is great, you're almost doing this weird thing too where you're like elevating yourself above them in a sense. Where you're like, look, I know better than you. You shouldn't get thrown at the wall. You know what I mean? And maybe
and this is where it comes down to that thing that we talked about back to like the path of porn.
Yeah.
It's that when you empower yourself and when you decide you're going to make the choices of how you're going to represent yourself or how you're going to respect your body, it's your choice.
Right. Live and let live.
So who's to tell you that it's wrong
Right.
to make the choice? If I'm going to exploit myself, should that label still be used then at that point? If I made the choice to do it, am I
Well, look,
exploiting myself?
are we therapists because we've been sad and anxious? Probably. Right? Like we both had some,
And we made a choice at one point in time that this is the path we're going to take because we're going to use the skills we learned from our own struggles, and we're going to try to help others with those.
And just because society deems that appropriate right now doesn't mean it's any more appropriate than if, it went a different direction. Right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm sure there was a thought process at one point in time that if you ever struggled with a mental health issue, you should not be in that profession.
Yeah. Which which to me is wildly.
You were going to say insane, and then you're
I
like, it's probably not a good word to use.
But I paused it.
No, I'm thinking of so many different scenarios that all play into the same thing. Like it's all right. It's like having a straight actor play a homosexual or something like that. There's some people that would say like, why wouldn't you just cast, a homosexual for that role or something like that? At
a certain point, we all need to relax, I think.
I do think that there is definitely some of that there for sure.
Yeah.
The thing that we do as a society right now is we think everything is a malicious choice.
Mm-hmm.
When someone feels excluded, we immediately go to like, that was a malicious choice.
We want to show everyone our virtues. Like we do this like weird like virtue signaling thing where it's like I know what's right and we have to do what's right here.
And I'm not going to pretend like I'm an angel and that like I've never fallen into this, because I definitely have probably been there with casting stones.
You are a bleeding heart, Dave. There's no denying that.
I definitely have my moments where I will have strong opinions about things. But the thing that I have to remind myself, and I've been trying to get better and better with that, is the thing that I do with people all the time is like try to understand where they're coming from before you make that quick judgment of why they made the decision they made.
That's all.
Don't assume that reason until you get more information.
Because for years you've been trying to better understand people, and by trying to better understand people, you've been better understanding people. Then, of course, when we change over time, and we start to say like, oh, maybe that wasn't the best choice. Maybe I know, I get it. But here's the thing. Maybe we should get into some staples of the freak show.
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to do that. And I got a couple little stories for you, actually. So the bearded lady. Now, that doesn't sound all that sideshow worthy these days, right? So, but if you're thinking of like Victorian gender ideology, it would have been like this woman, she has this beard, but at the same time, very feminine and like speaking very softly and wearing the beautiful dress and everything like that. So it was like this contradiction, right? Yeah. So there's this great story of this woman. It's kind of a tragic story, but Julia Pastrana, 1834, from Mexico. She teams up with this shadowy, what do we decide on, ringmaster,
I guess.
Yeah. So his name was Theodore Lent, and he marries her.
Lent,
like the after on the way to Easter. Yeah. So he marries her and he takes all the proceeds, of course, because it's 1834, and controls her. And she had tons of skills. Like, so she speaks multiple languages. She can do all these sort of she can spin things. She's pretty talented, right? So she gets pregnant. She dies in childbirth, and the child dies. But before the child dies, Theodore Lent realizes that, look at that. The son was like covered in hair, kind of like Julia was. And what he does, instead of just like honoring their death and kind of, appropriately, he embalms both of them and brings them as a display. He finds another bearded lady, marries her, and calls her the dead wife's sister, and creates this whole sort of display based on this, I don't know, really dark, marketing. And at the end of his life, he ends up in a mental institution. You can imagine why, right?
Yep.
So there's a fat lady. That was a staple. I mean, that's what it was called, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Here's one
this one's a horrible name.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's kind of on the nose, right? So pinheads. Maybe I'll talk about I think I've talked about that in the past, my experiences with someone who might have had microcephaly.
I used to work with an adult that had it as well.
Well, so when I was, should I tell the story? When I was a kid, my dad, would go to the bar a lot, and there was a person who was, you know, a microcephaliac. I don't know what you want to say there. Like if I had to describe it, they suffered from microcephaly, right? And he would just leave me there with that person, and I was completely freaked out, and scared, and had no idea like how to communicate, because oftentimes these people will have intellectual disabilities, poor speech, motor function is off, seizures, and obviously abnormal facial features.
Yeah, I mean, a good example for that people probably already know of is the person that used to be on Howard Stern all the time, Beetlejuice.
Oh, yeah.
There's a bunch of memes with him in it. Yeah, he definitely had that.
Yeah, so it's funny because it's like we're talking about how in history there would be like court jesters who would just laugh at these people. There would be Jenny Lee and Elvira Snow were Pip and Flip in the movie Freaks, and obviously they were in Sideshows too. And then you bring up, like, these days we were like, we would never exploit someone these days who has this disorder. But then you just bring up Beetlejuice, and it's
I was just thinking of
actually,
Howard Stern in general was like its own sideshow. He used to bring on people all the time that had something, and it was done in a way to poke fun.
Yeah, they would ask him like math problems and stuff, and like it's it's kind of really in bad taste, I think, right? And then Howard Stern kind of sells himself as this sort of woke kind of person nowadays, which I we all grow, right? I mean, that's good and everything like that, but it's like, come on, man. That was some rough stuff. Albinos, little people, strong men, and then there was like skill players too, like trapeze and a lot of horse riding, everything like that. Can you think of anything else?
Yeah, there's I don't really know what it's called, but there's like, so one example is this individual called Lalu, and he actually had like and like extra limbs growing out of it. It almost looked like another body was attached to him, but with no head. So he had limbs like kind of coming out of him.
Was there a story, like a crab person, or
it's like I don't know if it's like a parasite, if it's considered like a parasite or something like that. I've kind of read that, and I don't know if that's real or not. But then there's also like Siamese twins, which is obviously conjoined, and sometimes they might share a head but have like two separate actual bodies. But I just, with like that Lalu, I heard that he had like his limbs were like that body that was coming out of him was like fully functioning, if you know what I mean.
Well, yeah, well, he's like obviously a twin, and he absorbed the twin, right?
Sure.
In utero.
Sure.
And then when the mother gave birth, and whatever year this was, the doctors were probably like, oh, wow.
So you know how I got into, like, when we were doing some of the research on like serial killers, I got into like the murderabilia.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. There's like these old photos of these individuals, and I'm like, I think I want to collect those.
Yeah, I can see that a little bit, right? Yeah.
I saw one of Lalu, and I'm like, I want that.
Yeah, the black and white sort of, there's a creepiness to it.
I think I got to go look downstairs. I think we have a Tom Thumb picture.
Really?
Him and his wife.
Wallet size?
I can't remember her name. She was also part of the sideshow.
Yeah, because she was a little person.
There was like a little love triangle. I mean to say that. There was also a love triangle.
That's another Freudian slip.
Yeah, that played out, and I can't remember the other individual's name. But yeah, I have a photo of two little people, like dressed very dapper. And I gotta find it. I was trying to look for it after I was researching this. I was like,
little itty bitty little love triangles.
I mean, the girl, I'm trying to remember her name. She was like tiny. It's when we're talking about like individuals who are like, some of them
under 2 feet.
Under 2 feet. That's insane. Like, how do they even have organs at that? Like that as an adult?
They're little, Dave.
Yeah,
I know. The organs are little. Yeah, no. So
obviously, but like, it's mind-boggling.
It's mind-boggling.
It's fascinating. It's really fascinating.
Well, the thing is, it does something to you. So there's like, and then you sort of got to ask yourself the question, like, what is creepiness? And I think if you're going to answer that, It's like this.
But it's more to me, and I'm not like arguing with you, but I like just want to point something out. I think it's more than just creepiness because it happens. It's like there's just something. There's curiosity. That's like we're curious about things. Like it's
unsettled though.
Sometimes, but like, all right, for example, people with disabilities. I work with them. So I have this experience where like I'll walk around, like I'll never forget one of my first experiences. I was like 18. I'm walking with this individual with a disability and we're at the mall. And he turns to me at one point and goes, why does that woman staring at me? Why is she staring at me? And I'm like, in my head, I'm like, because you have a disability. It's the only reason I can give you. And I was like annoyed for him. And I remember like starting to pay attention to how many people were staring at him or would look at him. And I'm like, and he's not even like, it's not like he had some kind of physical abnormality. It was just has a intellectual disability. And I don't know, some of his features maybe displayed that a little bit. It's hard to say. But like I started to notice, and I've noticed it ever since then. And sometimes I will actually say something to people. Very rarely, it would have to be like a very like rude person in order for that to happen. But yeah, there's something that makes us curious. But like I think about kids, they'll stare because they're trying to understand it, right? Like, why do kids stare? They don't know that it's like they're not always like fully aware, like, oh, that's rude to stare, or like, oh, I shouldn't be staring. So they'll do it, and they'll say something sometime.
I honestly think the right word maybe isn't creepiness, but I think what's going on there, and even with kids, because they have to. Because here's the thing, like your brain is sensing something different, and it's sensing something where it's not at the point where you need to fight or flight. It's not like I need to bolt right now. I need to, so because if you're every time your brain sends something that was just a bit off, not quite alarming, but just a bit off, you'd be running and fight or fighting all over the place. But it's like this somewhere in between fight or flight and like unsettled, where like your brain is sensing something where it doesn't need you to run, but it needs you to pay attention, and because you might have to, right? Like I really think it's like something about that is creepiness. I want to say that's the word for it. Unsettled. Is it like biological where we're like detecting something that's often it's like pathogen avoidant? Where, like there's something different about this person. This person's like me, but they're slightly not like me, and I need to be careful about that. I honestly think that there's something very sort of evolutionary why we. It's like almost like you
when
you want to look, you can't not look. You have to look. You have to.
If you saw somebody that has some kind of abnormality, and let's say it's like there's nothing scary looking about this person, and you glance, and then like you catch yourself kind of maybe like looking a little bit more. Yeah. That's because you're finding them creepy. That's what I'm saying. Like I can think of 1,000 examples where like I'm so curious, but like I'm definitely not like uneasy about it.
But what if you said, you don't know what, you can't put a name to it. So your brain is making you pay attention for
I think it's like uncanny valley.
That's exactly right.
But I don't.
Because do you remember your big revelation for uncanny valley?
What was that?
It was that we were afraid we were going to have sex with it.
Mic drop. That's what it is.
Dude, that's what it could be, right? Like it's all those things.
I just think we're attracted to things that maybe sometimes stray from what we know. Like it's, what's a good example? The whole idea of like, it's better to be unique than to look exactly like everybody else, right? Why? Like there are people that probably want to look like everybody else. I guess
it's more interesting.
It's more interesting.
Yeah.
It's different. It's special. I think it can be creepy. I'm not disagreeing that there can be that, but sometimes it's not. It's just like it makes you curious and you just want to look and you want to understand it better.
I know, but there's some hard truths here that we're talking about. It's like, so let's put your now we'll go to you.
Yes.
Now I'll ask you a question.
Please do.
You're at a gas station. It's late. It's dark. You're on a road trip.
See, you're already making it creepy. Put me in the midday. I'm at the freaking outlet.
No, but hold on.
That's what I'm thinking.
I'm changing it now.
Yeah.
But I'm putting you back at the gas station. and you're pumping gas, and there's a beautiful beautiful woman, blonde woman, just pumping gas, and you're like, you know, you don't need to look over and over again, or like a really handsome man, handsome, stunning, slick back hair, beautiful,
Stacked hair.
and then you see
A real
someone,
paisone, you know?
who's bald and maybe the eyes a little droopy,
And I'm like, oh,
and for whatever reason, you're gonna watch one of those more than the other. And I
watching
don't.
that bald guy because he's shifty to me. No, I'm just-
Why? But there is something there, right? Like
I'm not looking at that bald
guy.
guy. I'm not. He's like the last one I'm looking at.
You're seeing something that's catchy. Like you don't want to admit that but it's your brain does that to you, right? Like your brain doesn't know social norms. Your brain doesn't get what's politically correct. It's gonna do what it's gonna do to protect you, and that's it.
Well, you know, maybe not in the same vein of what we're discussing now, but another thing I was going to get to with the kids is I think it's interesting how, at some point we understand it's not okay to stare, right?
Right.
Becomes ingrained in us, and it's something like obviously your parents have to teach you because that's not an instinctual thing. I don't think, because you always hear parents correct their kids.
Yeah.
And kids are so innocent and pure because they will like say it too. I watched, there was a woman once. I watched her. She was she was completely covered. It was like 90 something degree weather. She had like almost like a veil on. She was covered like long sleeves. Every inch of her skin was covered. A little boy and his dad were sitting next to her, and the little boy goes up to her and he goes, "Why are you wearing that?" And she very politely and nicely said, "Oh, I have to protect my skin from the sun." And he goes, "Why?" And then she just started to explain that she has like, you know, this condition that makes her very vulnerable. And the dad, he's like, at one point he was like almost going to stop the kid. And then she's like, no, it's okay. And I bet that dad was like probably crawling out of his skin.
Yeah.
Like, cause that in the dad's mind, like understands like that, or he believes that's something we're not supposed to do.
Which is sort of so counterproductive. Like we've, as a society, been like, no, don't ask those questions so you can better understand this person and be comfortable with them. Avoid all that. Keep your preconceived notions,
right,
and keep your distance, which is like it just breeds fear, breeds hate. It's like the kids got it right.
What that kid did was perfect.
Yeah.
And like the dad went along with it eventually. He chilled out, and the dad ended up talking to her, and I was like, watched the whole interaction. I was like, oh, that was a nice interaction to watch, because I like there was so many layers to it. But yeah, and it actually makes the staring worse, because now the staring is not met with questions.
Right.
Now we know if someone stares, like we internalize that as like, oh, they're looking at me because they have a problem with me, versus they're just curious, right?
Wow. Okay. I want to talk about one last thing. This Freaks movie, and I know you didn't get a chance to watch it, so I'll just go through it quick.
Yep.
It's definitely a horror film. You would love it.
And I believe, you know, I'm totally aware of it. I just never have gotten access to it. I was joking with you before that I'm not going to pay for it, so I'm just wait for it.
You said you're gonna wait, and what's funny about that is it came out in 1932. So
yep.
But there's this. So it's made at a time. This is kind of interesting, right? We talk about, I don't know if creepiness is the right word, but it's made at a time when you can use people with deformities about a people with deformities.
Greg, can you lift yourself up, because people are probably wondering what's going on under there, and if you're one of the people that you're talking about.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, do you ever think? So I guess we were kind of talking about that before, whereas like, oh yeah, like we of course we're going to use people with microcephaly to play people with microcephaly in this movie. Like, but that's kind of like, but at the same time, are they, so if someone has an intellectual disability, do they understand that they're being filmed and they're going to be watched? And I don't know, like this is exploiting, but it's also kind of good, right? Because this is what people say all the time now. They, if you're making a movie about people with deformities, should you hire people with deformities to play these roles? I mean, yes and no, right? But let me give you a quick synopsis. That was a
synopsis. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, let me give you a quick explanation. I won't even try it again. Synopsis. I can do it. By the way, Um, beautiful, beautiful trapeze lady in this movie. And so she marries this. Well, she's in a relationship with this strong man. His name is Hercules, pretty on the nose too. And they had this plot to steal Hans, who is this little person. He gets an inheritance, and they're going to steal it because it's a pretty sizable inheritance. She plans to sort of trick him, Hans, into thinking she's in love with him, and then she's going to kill him and run off with Hercules and the money, right? So the quote unquote freaks figure it out, and this trapeze lady feels nothing for them. She can't. I guess the movie's in a way sort of about class warfare or like othering, whatever. But she cares nothing about. That's made very clear that she thinks that she's so much better than them. They're nothing. She can just steal from them. He shouldn't be having that much money, right? And all the freaks, they uncover this plot and they get her back in like a next level. Get her back. So they turn her into the thing she despises most, right? They feel disrespected. So what they do is they blind her, they burn her, they cut off her legs, and they turn her into a sort of duck.
Huh.
And it's just horrific when they show this. And I don't think all versions show it, but it is she did this horrible thing, and then it's like they answer back with an even more horrible thing, and it's like it's a really dark movie. And there is something, Dave, I don't know how you feel about that. So you've been working with people with special needs your entire life almost, right? Your entire professional adult life. Now, if they were going to make a movie about people with special needs, would you feel comfortable with people that you work with portraying people with special needs in a movie?
I would want them to.
Okay. Then
Yeah.
that's all
I
think that's
believe
really cool.
I think they would do a more accurate representation than Cuba Gooding Jr.
Mm.
You know what I'm talking about? Radio.
Yeah. Absolutely. Right.
I mean, Sean Penn did a wonderful job, but like
I understand.
Not everybody's Sean Penn.
So repulsed and attracted at the same time, I think is a good way to explain this, right?
Yeah. The scene that obviously like is the most legendary is that One of Us scene, and that is like chilling. The dinner table scene.
Yes. That, I mean, the way it's 1932, so there's already a feel there. There's already, and then I don't know. I was creeped out. I watched it on like a big screen too. It was just, and then it made me like sort of, it reminded me of something that's not my own thought, but I can't remember who said it. But you'll pay money for any emotion. That's true. You'll pay money for any emotion, and that's what all these things do. So this reality TV, like sideshows, all this stuff, it invokes emotion, right? That's kind of what we're going to these things to do. I don't know. It's I think that we've kind of fell into a couple of different things here that are I don't know. Here's one last kind of take, like medicine and science, and it's kind of ruined this thing. It made it impossible for all this like magic and tall tales to be fun. It takes the magic, like everything that the more we learn and the more you're a baseball fan, right? Like everything's had the magic ripped from it. Even baseball, where like when we were kids, it would be like, do you feel like you should steal the base? That's how they played baseball. Even when we watched,
Right.
Pawtucket Red Sox or whatever, it was like
Yeah.
the coach had a feeling or the manager had a feeling, right? And you should. It wasn't based on statistics like it is now. And I don't know. There's just something. Well, everything's getting the magic stole from it. The more we learn, the more we rely on numbers instead of emotion. So emotion gets a bad rap, maybe even especially in what we do. Like you can't really trust them. Just because you have an emotion doesn't mean you're actually feeling it. Use the logic, but I don't know, something really important. Emotion can make things really meaningful and powerful too.
Yeah. Wouldn't like in like Taoism, wouldn't they like say logic is like for fools?
Yeah, but it's always, but that's not true, right? I mean, because you can feel, if I'm telling myself the wrong story, But so is that if to say that you can always trust your emotions? Because we know that's not true.
No. I think what it is to say is like to trust more of like what's our nature. And that's kind of what we just talked about with like kids. Our nature is to be curious. Our nature is to ask questions. When
That's
we deny it, we're kind of denying ourselves certain experiences and certain information.
right. Right. So like if we sort of, because our gut or our emotions, our feelings, that's like, if we're going to talk about Freud for the second time today, like that's our consciousness is the tip of the iceberg, and the rest is um your unconscious, and our unconscious is our feelings, our emotions, our gut. Shouldn't we trust that thing that's so much bigger and seeing so much more than what we are? And our consciousness is limited because of all those ideas. Like we don't know why we're at this point. We don't know why we're being quiet and not asking someone that question. Like maybe that's but that's something that's been instilled with us since we were little. So it's just
I thought
there's
of
a lot to take in.
I thought of what I was thinking of earlier in the show when I was saying like, doesn't that still exist in certain like that idea of like free, like this curiosity or oddity thing, and you pay a little bit of money and you get to see it. Yeah, have you ever been to the Big E
I haven't.
in Springfield, Mass?
No, I know about it, but I haven't been there.
Yeah, very big.
Fair.
What do you call it? Fair, yeah. But they do have like a line of like carnival style things. They used to have an elephant that would just kind of walk circles and you could ride on its back. I don't know if they still have that or not. I kind of like sad to watch that. But they would have this thing where it's like come see the half boy, half this, and like I never actually would go in because it's obviously not a real thing.
Yeah.
But now I kind of wish I had, because I'm like, I don't know what that was in there. And that's the thing. It's like you want to know. Even if you don't want to know, you want to know. Yeah, even if you don't. It's
so and
my For You page sometimes on Instagram turns into that a little bit, which is sometimes really troubling when you're in public and suddenly you're seeing all these like weird people.
I'm sure that's what your For You page is. I don't even know what a For You page is.
It's like that page where they like recommend things based on what you've already looked at. But like, I'm going to say something that I'm going to regret. One time I looked up like,
you got to do it now.
Pulling ticks off people, or like pulling bugs off out of like things. Like,
why are you embarrassed about that? It's fascinating.
Because it's weird that like it's like oddly like satisfying watching them like remove a bug from a person.
Yeah. I mean, I thought for a second there like maybe you had a tick on you, and I thought that would have been completely appropriate to watch.
I watched other people getting.
Hey, good to know. Good to know, though, right? I mean, it is. Look, we got deer ticks here at Rhode Island, and you have 24 hours to get those suckers off. So good to know. And watch out also to our fans that are close. Watch out for the mosquitoes. A lot of like talk about that these days.
Why? What's going on with the mosquitoes these days?
Man, they've found like a few cases of Triple E in in a few different cities here in Rhode Island. So
wonderful.
And West Nile style.
Not great, but anyways, so one of the things about this is like this couldn't, like you said, the magic's gone because of like the advancements of medicine and science, right? So like what was considered to be a bearded lady, now there's like a scientific explanation for that, and that like loses the ability for us to have that curiosity about it. So like this really couldn't exist in today's society, and also for other reasons this couldn't really exist in today's society. But there is something like when you watch like a movie about a carnival or a show about the carnival, or even like I said, like even go to a fair and you kind of get a little bit of that taste, like there is something about it that's like I kind of wish I could experience.
Oh, well, look, make no mistake. We're still observing people. Like look at Instagram is us observing people.
Sure.
Right. I mean, that's just a part of human nature.
Here's a great example of that. There's this individual on Instagram and he calls it a chicken wing. So it's like his arms in the shape of, I guess, like a wing. And he basically uses like that platform to showcase like how he eats or how he does certain things, but like a lot of eating. He does a lot of eating.
He pulls ticks off people with it.
But if it's for educational purposes, is it exploitation? Because I'm sure he's making money doing it as well. Because I'm sure he's getting a lot of views and likes and stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
But he's posing it as like showing people how he can, eat a giant Big Mac.
and you're like, oh well, I'm glad I know how that operates now.
Yeah. Is it exploitation?
Well, we can't say, oh, it's all exploitation, but does that make it bad? Just because
Sure.
is exploitation bad? So
Right.
I would say
if it's for educational purposes,
what-
is it? And we're unable to judge, basically what we're saying. It's up to the person.
Yeah, I think that's
So
it. I
in
think it's
today's
like,
society, if you want to exploit yourself, go ahead.
I think if a person has the capacity of free will, then we have to let them exercise it.
Here's another version of this that
Unless it's hurting someone or
somebody posed this as exploitation. I was kind of like a little bit like, I don't know if I agree with that. So have you ever watched Love on the Spectrum?
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, great show. Funny, charming, heartwarming, all those things.
Yes.
So I asked someone if they watched it, and they said, "No, I don't really like that show because I feel like it's just exploiting them." And I thought about it. I was trying to figure out like what could they mean by that? Like, why is it exploiting them? And then there's always that thing that comes back to me is like, do they know why some of these things are funny? Like, they're just being themselves, and we're getting a kick out of it. Is that exploitative? Like, they're quirky. They have some traits that make them a little odd at times.
But when you're laughing, though, and I know that I can speak for myself, like when I'm laughing at that, I'm like, it's like a very like, I'm not ashamed of laughing.
It's an endearing laugh.
Yes, dude,
like I would do it if I was like in a conversation with them.
Yeah. So exactly, I do it with autistic patients. We laugh together, and I it's part of the process of like, yeah, no, this is great. This is like, I don't know. There's something so real about it.
So
like
I think that's kind of where I ended up landing is like, again, it's like the intent does matter at times. Like, it's not a malicious intent. It's not like a haha, oh my God, that's so like, oh, they're so
what an idiot.
It's not like that nothing like that. But at the same time, it's also like, isn't that what connects us is the ability to appreciate the differences and like
it's a beautiful sentiment. That's it, Dave. That's a beautiful sentiment. And that is what it's all about is like, what about this person can I appreciate? What about this person brings me joy? And it just happens to be easier with those people. Right. And,
so coming back to the sideshows, and I guess this is kind of like the last point that I have about this would just be, I feel like that was kind of the initial intent. Was to more of like to appreciate, and sure, somebody was going to make money off of it, and maybe that changed the way it was. And I'm sure, like, obviously, greed. Whenever money's involved, obviously, greed's going to be involved at some point. And if these are people that maybe they weren't regarded in the highest way as they would be today, or protected in the way that they are today. Obviously, a lot of bad situations can happen, but it did sound initially like there was, in some cases, not all, like obviously a person from West Africa brought to the States to be displayed. I don't think that was necessarily the case.
No, but like, look, getting attention for the way that you look, getting paid for the way that you look, that's just
like the way that
every day.
The way it was explained that like Tom Thumb, for example, was treated sounds more of like that was like to appreciate this individual's differences.
Yeah.
But it's hard to say because obviously we didn't live.
We weren't there. And did things kind of suck? Probably because it was 1800s. Everything sucked.
Everything sucked.
It's Dickensian. So yeah, it sucked.
Before we completely wrap up today, I just wanted to give a little bit of a shout out to an individual on YouTube. His page is XFC97 or XF Introspector 97 is the full name. But he gave us a really, really nice shout out on an episode based on our interview with Kathy and Sawyer, Sawyer being the former Heaven's Gate member. He basically, this guy recommended 3 podcasts who have, done episodes about Heaven's Gate and interviews, and he felt we were very respectful and non-judgmental. And I think that meant a lot to us, because that was kind of our goal, was to go into that being very open-minded and non-judgmental. And I just appreciate the fact that he took the time to make that video to shout out others for their interactions. So I really appreciate that. And you want to kind of do the same. So XFC97 is the page. So thank you.
Yeah.
What else you
No.
got,
All
Greg?
right. That's
What
it.
else you got? That's it.
I am out of words.
Okay. All right. So everybody, thank you for listening. As always, please make sure you are subscribed on YouTube, like the episode, all that good stuff. If you are listening on one of our audio platforms, please leave a rating and review if possible. We super appreciate it. But yeah, just, keep listening, keep reaching out, all that good stuff. We will continue to provide the best content we can. So thank you.
Yes, we will.
Yep. All right, everybody. Have a great night. Have a great weekend. All that good stuff. We'll see you later. Goodbye.